In this video, we will explore the final biblical quote that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered in his last speech, just one day before his tragic assassination. As an American Baptist clergyman and leading figure in the civil rights movement from 1955 until his untimely death in 1968, Dr. King dedicated his life to the pursuit of justice and a Christian lifestyle. Before his death, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave a speech titled, "I've Been to the Mountaintop," on April 3, 1968, just a day before he was killed. Dr. King reflected on his life and the civil rights movement in this stirring and prophetic address, emphasizing the necessity of continuing the fight for justice through peaceful means. He used the parable of the Good Samaritan to illustrate what he believed was Christ-like love and how it should be demonstrated. In this speech, King provided his own interpretation of the parable. A Jewish man traveling along the Jericho Road on the east side of Jerusalem was beaten, plundered, and left for dead by the side of the path. A priest and a Levite who belonged to the esteemed Jewish community passed by the man on important religious business without helping him. Finally, there was a third man that walked by, a Samaritan, who stopped to help him. According to King, even though the parable was frequently used to emphasize the value of being a good neighbor, it had a deeper meaning, especially in light of the racial and socioeconomic differences of the time. In his opinion, the priest and Levite who walked by the wounded man were hindered from being compassionate to the man due to fear and their preoccupied duties. King started off by speculating as to what the priest and Levite might have been thinking as they passed the wounded and robbed man. They might have been afraid that the thieves were still around and might attack them as well, or that the man was fabricating his injuries to trick them into a trap and rob them. He then concluded that the priest and the Levite asked themselves a defining question as they passed by. He said,
and so the first question that the priest asked, the first question that the Levite asked was, if I stop to help this man, what will happen to me? But then the Good Samaritan came by, and he reversed the question. If I do not stop to help this man, what will happen to him?
King contended that the Good Samaritan reversed the question from what will happen to me to what will happen to him. This reversal changed everything for the Good Samaritan and helped him focus on the person who was in need, having compassion no matter the circumstances. King contended that the Good Samaritan in the story was able to act compassionately because he was not restrained by mistrust and fear. When he noticed the man in distress, he saw him for who he truly was. The Good Samaritan possessed the courage and empathy to help the man in need, despite any possible risk this could have put him in. He did not think of himself, but only of the man in need. King was speaking to the racial tensions of the time and also the dire situation of the Tennessee sanitation workers who were on strike for poor working conditions and meager pay, emphasizing that racial, religious, and other societal boundaries shouldn't be barriers to kindness and charity to help those sanitation workers and others in need. While King's audience and many Christians at the time were familiar with the Good Samaritan parable, his focus on the racial distinction between the Samaritan and the wounded man served as a striking reminder of the reality of racial segregation and prejudice in America. King then concluded,
that's the question before you tonight. Not if I stop to help the sanitation workers, what will happen to all of the hours that I usually spend in my office every day and every week as a pastor. The question is not if I stop to help this man in need, what will happen to me? If I do not stop to help the sanitation workers, what will happen to them? That's the question.
He contended that while compassion and empathy can motivate people to act and strive for a better future, fear and distrust can cause individuals to turn away from those in need. This was a challenge to his audience to take action. He was urging people to consider their own deeds, whether they were living up to the values of compassion and unconditional love which Jesus taught, despite how they were treated by their offenders. King's interpretation of the parable of the Good Samaritan illustrated his larger nonviolent resistance philosophy and his faith in the ability of love and compassion to triumph over the injustice and selfishness of the world.